Thousands of Canadians suffer from hearing loss. Some are born deaf, others lose their hearing due to accidents, while others slowly lose their hearing over time. Then there are those who suffer from tinnitus. Regardless of what caused their hearing difficulties, these individuals must function in a world of sound and verbal communication. In addition to the challenges of living day-to-day life, they also run into barriers when seeking employment. Now, my guest today is Darren Bailey, employment consultant for the Canadian Hearing Society. So welcome to the show, Darren.
Thank you very much.
Now, I know you were on my other show that I had a few years back, and you brought some great devices and what have you, and things have moved forward since then.
Yes, definitely.
Well, that's good. How big a problem is hearing loss as far as in Canada? What kind of numbers are we talking?
So Canada, as population, is roughly 36.5 million, around there. It's estimated that 10% of the population has hearing loss.
Wow.
And it's a growing.
I gotta say, that's probably a low number.
Yeah, that's a rough number. Yeah, for sure. 10%. It's consistent. And there's, like you mentioned at the beginning, there's various causes of it. And then the implications of that and their communication styles. That's part of that, right? There's going to be different communication needs for individuals, right?
And of course, it can be compounded if they have other difficulties also.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's a real challenge.
Yeah.
So how difficult is it for an individual with severe, or even total hearing loss to actually get on a job on their own?
Well, sadly, the stats really point out that the challenge. We're looking typically around a 40 to 47% unemployment rate for deaf and hard of hearing Canadians, which is, it's unacceptable.
No, and I imagine the 53% doesn't mean full-time employment either.
Often not. A lot of it's contract, self-employment, or when they do have the employment, it's maintaining it, right? So the good news is there's specialized supports for not only the deaf and hard of hearing job seeker, but also employers that want to hire them. So.
Well, this is the reason I invited you to the show today, because I know that the Hearing Society helps those seeking jobs, but it also helps reach out to employers to help them accommodate for people with hearing loss. But I think the first thing we need to ask is what individuals actually are eligible for your services.
Yeah, and so our clients are a very diverse group. So we have what we call the culturally deaf, and the deafened and hard of hearing, and that means that, I guess the point is that not one client is the same to the other. There's different backgrounds, different I guess histories, how they grew up, what their communication preference is, and we have services that take that into account, and it's really important that employers understand that as well. When we talk about culturally deaf, we're talking about individuals that have a culture, they have a background, and typically it's ASL, American Sign Language, is that language, and they have their own values and norms. So we talk about when we engage employers is to make sure they understand the difference between hearing culture and deaf culture. And,
right.
It's a really important thing to look at. It helps both sides understand where the other's coming from.
I can see that as being quite a challenge in the fact that I would imagine as someone who's been deaf since birth versus someone who loses their hearing over time could be coming from a fair difference in their culture.
Absolutely. If you take the example of deafened or late deafened, as the term is, typically they were raised and communicated orally. However, due to an accident or perhaps a virus or whatever the case was, where they could suddenly lose hearing, or they were hard of hearing and the hearing loss became more progressive, they're still speaking, but they can't actually hear. So that's, for them to be able to just all of a sudden be sign language experts, it doesn't work like that. It's not. It's a different phenomenon.
And I know there is also in the culture of those who are hard of hearing. And as I told you when you were on the show before, my father was very hard of hearing all his life, and it did progressively get worse as he got older, to the point where if he was in a group of people and he was a little bit off to the side, and there was a group talking, he starts getting a little paranoid that they're talking about him, even if they're not, because he can't hear anything they're saying, and he's trying to pick up little snippets of it. And that must be a challenge also.
Background noise is is a huge barrier for someone that's hard of hearing, and we don't often think about that for those that have hearing or that they're not having the challenges that hard of hearing people do. Just simply reducing that background noise can make a huge difference. And one speaker at a time and having some management to our meetings it makes a big difference.
And this is something that not only employers but individuals everywhere need to understand. A person can be fitted with a hearing aid which will greatly improve their ability to hear. But the background noise is a real problem with a hearing aid.
Hearing aids, and this is something that we, deal with all the time and help job seekers and employers, is to understand, what hearing aids do and what they don't. There's someone that wears hearing aids is still hard of hearing and still needs good communication practice. And the other thing too is there are some individuals that wear hearing aids, but they're not being used for clarity of speech. In fact, they're only being used to alert them to really loud environmental noise. It's more of an alert. It's not going to mean that they're going to be able to hear.
No, they won't be able to make out a conversation, but if there's suddenly a siren go off, which is good. I mean, obviously that's a big advantage over not hearing it at all.
Yeah. And the thing that I guess it's awareness, right? Is just because someone wears hearing aids, it doesn't. That's part of the mix, but it's also how is their speech clarity, and that's where when people get to know more about what the challenges are and what they can do to help prevent the barriers, then it really helps things out.
I guess the one other thing we should point out, and this is important when talking to someone who has a hearing aid, for example, working with someone or even at a party, our ears are remarkable, including our earlobes. I mean, they're almost like omnidirectional. But a hearing aid is fairly direct.
Well, actually, with the advances in technology, and being that we're using digital technology now, the programs that our hearing aids can be programmed to have the microphone change direction, omnidirectional, during a conversation, like through the use of apps that we have on our smartphones, you can control. So there's things that are, I guess, have really helped the experience of the hearing aid user. But again, it all gets down to the user. They're still being hard of hearing. It's an exhausting experience, and they are going to be concentrating all the time on hearing. There's a strain to that.
Right.
You could have background noise. Sometimes just the environment that you're in can change, and the acoustics, whatnot. So,
the acoustics would make a big difference.
The accent of the speaker, a male versus female voice. There's lots of things that have to be considered.
So how do people basically come and apply or get involved with your services?
So we work. We can accept referrals, self-referrals, or we may get a referral from another service provider or even internally. The good thing with the Canadian Hearing Society is we have a whole host of supports within our offices that can help somebody. So if they identify employment as a goal or something that maybe they are working and having a challenge, they can connect with us and we can get there to help them out.
Well, I really want to focus on the employment side in the show today, but the one other question I have is hearing aids are very expensive. What type of help can people get who just don't have the funds?
And that is, you're raising a very, very true point. What we suggest somebody does, if that's what they're dealing with, they're having that challenge, and this is something I hear all the time is, I need hearing aids. Come and talk to me or any of my colleagues across the province, and we sit down and we look at that. There are some funds that are available through specific programs, but we have to go through the assessment make sure they're eligible. Sometimes it's a case of mixing an ADP funding. Sometimes somebody has benefits from a spouse or themselves with employment. There are programs out there that help that, but it's definitely
well,
a
that's good
problem.
to hear.
Yep. It's definitely
But you have
a
to know
challenge.
them.
Yep.
You got to know the ins.
Yep. You got to know the connections. Yep.
Well, obviously, in addition to helping individuals and they come reaching out to you, you also reach out to employers, because obviously you can't help individuals if you don't have employers. And one of the things I know you have now, of course, is a website, which I think right after the break we'll take a good look at.
Yep.
But what else? How do you reach out to employers?
Well, there's sometimes, an example could be is that we're supporting a job seeker and they submit a resume or they do an online application and they get the call or the email or the contact that they want to come for an interview. And that sometimes is a segue into the involvement of our agency to help that employer be prepared for the accommodation piece or to understand how to get accessibility in place. So we could do it that way. It could be us just reaching out to find out what their staffing needs are. And,
Right.
So more of like the job development side of things. So, I mean, there's lots of different ways that we would get connected to employers.
Well, that's good.
Sometimes we get the calls from an employer that says they need information and they want to know, what to do.
Well, one of the things, like I said, and after the break we will look at the website, and this is an advancement from last time we spoke, obviously. It's a toolkit that helps employers understand what it's, I think it covers a lot of territory, right?
Yes.
So I was kind of wondering, you get employers who do reach out to you. I take it you have some type of a program, though, where you do reach out and try to find other possible employers.
Yes.
You do, eh?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, it's so important because, as you say, for them to get a job on their own is, well, let's face it, it's 47% unemployment, and that's even with your help. Yeah. It's pretty darn tough. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take a break, and when we come back, Darren's going to show us some great stuff they now have. And it's basically an employer toolkit, is it not? Yeah, and we will do that in just a couple of minutes. We'll see you back shortly. Welcome back to Pathways to Success. I'm Don Reist, and with me is Darren Bailey, employment consultant with the Canadian Hearing Society. Well, Darren, we've talked about the challenges faced by the individuals, the challenges faced by people who have to deal with the individuals, but most importantly, they need employment. And I understand now, as we mentioned before the break, that you now have a great toolkit for employers. Yep. Can you tell us all about it?
Yes. It's called Breaking the Sound Barriers to Work, and it's an electronic toolkit that an employer can have access to, and it has a whole host of resources and information that they can turn to be able to get armed with information to be able to successfully integrate a deaf or hard of hearing employee into their workforce. And the good news is that not only do they have this, but they have the support of someone like myself to help them with that. And so there's lots of support there, and we're there to help them be successful. We know that they're the leaders in their industry, and this is just going to help them do that, diversify their workforce, and to reap the benefits of hiring someone that's deaf or hard of hearing. They are absolutely hugely productive, efficient. Have great ideas and adaptability, and it's the debate is over about, whether deaf or hard of hearing people can work. They can
Oh,
absolutely work great.
They are incredible
But
employees.
and given that we know that there are lots of ways that accommodations, can take place, and we know there's huge advancements in technology to do that, like many disability groups will tell you, it's not that there isn't a way to do it. It's the willingness, it's the attitude, it's a human thing that's driving the barrier. So I think what happens is once an employer gets to know more about the situation, they get to experience it, they see it's not a difficult thing to do, and they get great benefit out of it.
And this is just it. And we've mentioned on the show many times that people with disability make outstanding employees.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you'll never get a more appreciative employee, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Yes.
And they know their stuff. So how do we get the
So yeah, well, I thought this would be a great opportunity to maybe go over some of the parts of the website. So it's an electronic toolkit, like I mentioned. So I'm going to just go to a few of the areas and kind of point out what an employer is going to see when they go on this. And I won't be able to get into every detail of it, but you're going to see that there's a whole bunch of information about how to communicate with with a deaf or hard of hearing employee, how to make that work, what is going to help that experience out. So on the site, there's I guess terminology and I guess kind of getting started point. How do I get started? What do I need to know? And a really important thing to understand is the best person to ask for all this information is the employee. They are the expert in what their needs are, and let them help, guide you as an employer and work together on a plan, and they will let you know what they need, right? So
work together with the employee. Exactly right.
Yep. So there's a section on workplace culture, and we mentioned that a little bit before about getting to understand that, to understand that if an employee doesn't necessarily respond to you right away, it's not that they're being insubordinate or aloof. It's they might not have heard or caught the cue. So I guess it's just being aware that things might be done a little bit different, or you may need to you need to understand that you need to be facing somebody if they rely on speech reading, and trying to control the background noise. Like those kinds of tips are in there. Running an accessible meeting. Doesn't cost a thing to change that practice. One speaker at a time, having an agenda before a meeting, that helps everybody. It's like
it's common sense, really.
And a lot of what kind of comes into the background of all this information is universal design, right? What's good for a deaf or hard of hearing employee is often excellent for any employee, right? Just having clear communication, that's great, right? So that's pointed out. So understanding the differences between hearing and deaf culture. Employers may just not know what is going on in the world of work these days, and the world of accessibility laws and whatnot. They just might not understand what their obligations are and what their roles are. They might not know if there's supports available for them to become accessible, and that's all in here. And they always have the ability to have somebody to talk to about that, to get that.
Somebody like yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So all of that's covered. There's a section called employment phases, and this is really, really important because, accommodating someone that's deaf or hard of hearing, there's a flow, right? It's right from the time that they apply to a job, to being interviewed, to being onboarded, and to being trained, and then the really important part of performance appraisal and checking in, how are things going. There's a number of phases where they're going to be wanting to be mindful of whatever the communication need is. So those are all outlined here on what they can do to help along with that.
Right.
We also have, and it's mentioned in the website, is we have a device loaner program where an employer can actually test out some devices for
that'd be excellent.
Communication. I brought a few of them along. I mean, there's all kinds of devices that are out there, but these are just some of the things that can make all the difference.
I'm going to
for
say
an
this is
employee.
what could turn it, the whole thing around right
Yep,
there.
Yep. So the site has lots of information about communication tips, how to hire an interpreter, a qualified interpreter. How do we do this? It's all outlined on the site. How to hire a cart writer, computerized access real-time transcription. It's real-time captioning or captioning of what's going on in a meeting. That makes that meeting accessible. Everyone can participate, right? So there's, how do we do this? How do I rent an FM system? How do I, all these things are outlined in the website. How to, have communication built in a workplace. What we're seeing is a huge popularity and interest in people taking American Sign Language classes.
Excellent.
I've been at the Canadian Hearing Society in the Durham office since 2008, and I can really tell you, like, I've saw a huge growth in the number of classes that we're running, the interest, and it comes also from employers that are bringing staff. That's their staff that want to communicate better with their new colleagues.
Excellent.
So
that really is encouraging.
Yeah, it's great, and it really it helps with team building. In my program, when we can help with the onboarding and orientation of a new employee and help break the ice, everybody gets to know one another. All those questions can get thrown out on the table about how are we going to communicate. We often hear the employer's concerns about safety, about communication. How is this going to work? And with information and that firsthand experience, they realize that it's, often they're already doing things that can be enhanced. It just needs to be pointed out. So
that is excellent, Darren.
So there's lots of resources. One of the, I guess, couple of really specific things that are good to point out in the website. There are actual videos that the employers can watch to get some firsthand experience of somebody that was working, a newly hired individual. There's scenarios, so case studies and samples of successful integration of deaf and hard of hearing employees into the workplace. There's an infographic section that has, it shows kind of the different things to be thinking about in your workplace that are communication areas, right? So lighting, good lighting, maintaining or controlling background noise, having visual alerts. This device here is something I can just quickly show. We're all using smartphones now.
That's right.
You could have the option of having a smartphone put on this, or it can be plugged into a landline, or this button can be placed outside of the office door to alert, and it'll light up. It'll also it helps with alerting. It helps them to know a phone call's coming in or a text has come in.
Right.
This here is This is one of the examples of an inline amplifier. So you're just taking your existing landline phone or business phone, and it just connects into it, and it provides extra tone and volume.
Which is significant.
Yep. And also this is what we call an FM or personal amplification system. If somebody's doing training, and there's a trainer can wear the transmitter, and the hard of hearing employee can use the receiver.
I see the receiver there for them, yeah.
Tons of things. There's lots of stuff going on with Bluetooth technology. People that have hearing aids now.
Well, that's got to be huge, the Bluetooth side.
Yeah, there's so many ways now that you can integrate that into workplace scenarios. So the bottom line is we are there to help, and we want to be part of it. We want people to not be overwhelmed with the situation, and just realize that they're on the cusp of a great opportunity to get some great employees.
I mean, the fact is they do have great employees, and I also highly encourage employers, in fact, even individuals, to go to the site. actually view some of the videos that Darren has mentioned. You'd be amazed, really, at how much you'll learn from this site and from the various videos in the presentation. The fact is that disabled people, including people who are deaf, make outstanding employees. They appreciate their jobs. They hardly ever miss work because they appreciate they have a job. It encourages actually other workers to step up and feel like they're part of the team, and that if anything happens to them, the employer is going to be fair with them also. There's so many benefits. Well, Darren, I want to thank you for coming. We've run out of time, unfortunately, because this has been fascinating. But still, remember, people with disabilities, forget the disability. For goodness sake, look at the ability of the person. You have things that need to be done, and they can do it for you. Don't tell me you can't find a person with the ability if you don't look at people with disabilities, because they're out there and they can help you. They'll make great employees. So until next time, I'm Don Reist saying good night and see you next time on Pathways to Success.